Welcome, everyone. I should start with full disclosure, which is Nick and Sheryl are not only colleagues, but they're friends, and we have known each other since before they were out to change the world, and it's my privilege to be able to talk to them about how they're doing it tonight. That is the point, right? The point is to change the world.
It sounds like a very lofty goal, but what we really want is just every individual to really think that they can make a difference, and they actually can. So the whole idea of this book is basically built on the premise that right now, probably the most important moral challenge, the paramount challenge of our time, is the brutality that is inflicted on so many people in so many countries because of their gender. So in the same way that in the 19th century, the big moral challenge was slavery, and in the 20th it was totalitarianism, so too we think that this is the challenge of our time.
But that's not where you started. You started as, well, following the news rather than stepping back and looking at it globally. It started in China, right?
When we were covering China, we were focused in 1989 on the Tiananmen Square massacre, and it was consuming us. It was all over the front page. It seemed the most important thing that could possibly happen, and we don't really know how many people were killed, but probably between 400 and 800. And then the very next year, we came across a study saying that every year in China, 39,000 baby girls die because they don't get the same access to food and health care that boys do. And we had never devoted one column inch to that. And the more we looked around, the more we became clear that was really a useful prism through which to look at a lot of things happening, that we didn't cover them, but they were enormously important. They helped shape these countries. But unless you actually took the prism of gender, they were just not existent.
So Sheryl, it's not a matter of there but for the grace of God and immigrant grandparents I might have been. This is where you would have been. I mean, you've been there.
Well, in many ways it's both. My grandmother's feet were bound. So basically in 3 generations, look at me. It shows that there's actually hope, which is really important, but also that China really was a place that was extremely backward. I mean, so, as Nick said, 39,000 baby girls, dying every year. In China, I mean, you had concubinage, you had, child marriages, just the worst of what the world could offer to women. And then in the space of 3 generations, they have brought about enormous change. So that's very, that's very encouraging for the rest of the world, where there are incredible, brutalities inflicted on women.
So I can understand how that would be your motivation here. And this is what I'm going to now focus my intellectual and journalistic efforts on. What pulled you? It's not the life you would have led, and it's unusual for a man.
Give us some credit. Come on.
We'll get to that question later.
Well, I think it was a gradual dawning. Part of it was really simply this journalistic exercise that if we're trying to cover the important things going on, and we don't pay attention to 39,000 baby girls that are missing, but focus just on a dissident, then we're really missing the story. Also, I think it was increasingly clear to us that China was enjoying a real economic boom precisely because it had figured out how to make use of the female half of its population. So part of it was journalistic, but part of it was also just the things you see as a reporter that haunt you, that you can't put away. And maybe that defining moment, that epiphany, came in Cambodia in 1996, and I was going to do a story about child prostitution globally. I'd been to the Philippines, I'd done some reporting on it in Japan and Thailand, and then I went to Cambodia, and I went first to a village called Svaipak, where there were 10 and 11-year-old girls being sold to the highest bidder, imprisoned there in that village and being sold. And then I went to a brothel in Phnom Penh and spent an afternoon with 2 girls, a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old. The 14-year-old had been sold by her stepfather, and the 15-year-old had been kidnapped by a neighbor and sold to that brothel. And they were imprisoned there. In the next brothel, right next door, they told me that it had burned down. And they told me that in the wreckage, they'd found the skeletons of 2 girls who had been chained inside because they'd been considered flight risks. And these 2 girls told me that if they tried to run away, and they were never paid for anything, if they tried to run away, the police would arrest them and send them right back. And maybe what really got to me most was that the 15-year-old's mother had, when the girl went missing, she'd traveled all over Cambodia looking for her daughter. And if your daughter goes missing in Cambodia, the place you look is in the red light districts. And so a week before I got there, the mother had gone to that red light district, to that brothel, had found her daughter. And in my naivete, I asked, well, why didn't your mother take you away? And the girl said that the brothel owner said he'd paid good money for me, and my mother would have to buy me back. And she didn't have the money. And, you know, I've never forgotten that afternoon with those 2 girls. And I think that, you know, partly Half the Sky is, in some sense, a very delayed response to a process that started that afternoon.
You refer to it as slavery. I mean, one of the points in the book is that this is not prostitution. We are not talking about it the way we talk about it here. We are talking about a completely different scenario, which is these people are imprisoned. Was that as much of a surprise to you as I think to your readers?
Oh, absolutely. You know, in many ways they call it sex trafficking, but you know, there's no exchange there. No one's selling sex. The girls are not selling sex, and they are being trafficked, but usually trafficking means across the borders, and there are a lot of girls who are not trafficked across borders, just within their own, you know, home country. So it really is tantamount to slavery. I mean, we've seen the dungeon-like cells where the girls are put, you know, if they try and rebel. I mean, we've seen the coffin-like rooms that some of them have just been forced to stay in, almost like solitary confinement in a jail. I mean, it's just horrific. So, you know, you really have to call it forced prostitution is a nice way of putting it, but it's really effectively slavery. They don't get paid for anything that they do. I mean, so it's worse than prison. At least you get something, some kind of benefit from it. They get nothing. And, you know, if you look back at the slave trade in the 1870s, at the peak of the slave trade in the
1780.
I'm sorry, 1780. Sorry about that. If you look at the peak of the slave trade, the number of people being brought over from Africa to the New World was about 80,000 a year. Now, I mean, these numbers are hard to come by, hard to really estimate, but the low estimates are at least 800,000 women and girls are being trafficked. So that's that's about 10 times, and it's, you know, some estimates go a lot higher, 10 times what the trade was at the peak of you know, the slave trade. So, I mean, it's pretty, you know, it's pretty amazing.
And like slavery, it's generational. Your mother is born into it. And tell about Mina.
Yeah, you know, this is not true in most parts of the world, but in India, the brothels breed a new generation of slaves. And Mina is a woman that we met in northern India, near the Nepal border, and wrote about. And how these women get this strength, I don't know. Mina was kidnapped as a young girl, I forget, at age 11 or 12. She was held in a kind of a cell until she reached puberty. Then her virginity was sold in the brothel. She was imprisoned there for years. She was indeed bred. She had a son and a daughter that were then taken away from her, raised elsewhere in the brothel. And then she refused to escape because she didn't want to leave them behind. But finally, the brothel owners were ready to kill her because she was trying to go to the police, to report it, to get her and her children out. So when they were ready to kill her, she did flee. And then she was able to marry somebody, and she would now go back to that brothel and go and plead with them to let her children out. And especially when her daughter began to reach puberty, then she became more and more urgent in her demands. and she would just get beaten up. She never was able to see her children. Sometimes they were inside the brothel and would hear her, and they didn't know really who she was, but they knew that she thought that, that she was their mother, and some of the other girls in the brothel said that maybe she was.